Hello, hello. I have to put a jacket on because it's like not warm. It's not warm yet. It's like I'm low-key a little cold, but I know it's about to be hot because in North Carolina, um, I don't use the B word in reference to weather anymore, the bipolar word, because, whole mental health, especially on Mental Health Awareness Month, completely misrepresentative of mental health. But North Carolina weather has its ups and downs, okay? You never really know what to expect. I was expecting it to be 75 degrees already, and it's only 70. So, jacket comes on. Oh boy, okay. So, happy Friday. Hopefully that means something to y'all. It means something a lot to me this weekend because, one, I don't have clients tomorrow. This is my off weekend where I get to have a little bit more of like me time, rest and restore because your girl's been cooking and I'm tired. So, but also too, I get to go hang out with my bestie and you'll be like, oh my gosh, y'all are gonna have such a great time. Where are you gonna go have drinks? No, this is a dog. Sorry, Maisie. Maisie already knows that Bialy, my bestie, she's like my spirit animal. Y'all will see if you follow my stories this weekend. We're gonna go hang out tonight because her family is doing family things and Bialy needs her bestie time and I need her bestie time too. So that's what I'm looking forward to today. But before we get there, I am making this particular talk to be one of those things, like the title being, what is therapy actually? This is honestly more for a video for the people to send, who already go to therapy, to send to the people that influence them to need therapy. Okay, because it was inspired this week by not only just one of my clients, but a couple of my clients coming into session and having run-ins with family members, with people that those people expected therapy to be a thing that makes my client cater to them. And so I wanted to just unpack, give some perspective as to what therapy actually is, okay? And there's a lot of different things. Like when I do my speaking, and not only just here on this virtual platform, but I actually, go out into the community and interact with people, mental health is a lot of different things. So today I want to talk about, I'm going to limit it to a couple of things to give people perspective of what therapy actually is, because even if you've been to therapy before, it's probably different now. Just the same way that if you've ever been into a rent-a-center to go buy a couch, there are going to be different couches in there in 2 years. Okay? Because my industry is constantly evolving. I would say that it's generally a little bit behind schedule, but honestly, it needs to be because it's needed because of the byproduct of everything that we have in our external construct of this world developing faster than we as humans are mentally and spiritually developing. So I'm going to go over a couple of points that hopefully if you send this video to someone who knows you're in therapy, but they're like, oh, man, just go talk to your therapist, or you need a new therapist. I'm going to read you what my client sent to me as a depiction as to why I'm low-key going to rant a little bit, but I'm going to try to make it make sense for those people who don't really understand what actually happens in therapy and what to expect if you have a loved one that is going into therapy or doing any kind of therapeutic work, okay? So let me start with, like I said, that's who this is for. This video is more for the people who need an understanding as to what are you actually doing and when you work on yourself. So let's start with the text message that triggered me. So my client texted me and they were like, I had a blowout with some people this weekend. My mother called me angry and pathetic. My cousin said I was immature and needed to grow up because I was trying to explain that I needed help. And when they do ask for help and she gets that help, there's still less accountability towards how she still needs to kind of get away, right? Because so this person is a caretaker for a family member. So then her mother said to her, I never change and I need a new therapist. And then my client was like, I don't agree. I think she believes that going to therapy makes you happy and more pliable. So that's why I'm going to use my voice, not only my expertise, but my voice after having to practice what I preach, because I have too been in situations where we're conditioned to feel like we can't take up space, we can't voice our opinions. So let's start with, why do people excuse me, why do people come to therapy? Well, that's one example, is that you can be existing in a system that you really didn't choose, right? Like, I didn't get to choose my parents. I didn't see, now I didn't get to choose my mother and my father meeting in divine intervention, right? Like, that is no one's choice as to where they're born, who and what family that they're born into. And sometimes those family members have absorbed and inherited very warped perspectives of what existing needs to look like. So when someone comes to therapy, they've been more or less restricted in how they can identify and understand who they get to be in this world. And this is a parent that was saying that to an adult child. Now, if this was a young child, I think even people who don't necessarily agree with therapy would have been like, don't speak to your children like that. But there also would be some people who've been like, yeah, the child is supposed to be seen and not heard. Those are the types of belief systems that therapy ultimately filters out over time, because to be honest with you, the more that a person not only hears that, but they replay it in their head, that would be generally anxiety disorder, generalized anxiety disorder. But that therapy works towards going from restriction to restoration, from being able to restore a mind state that they were influenced by negative, and being able to rebalance it into a neutrality point. That's just one example. Then I'm going to tell you what the therapy I do with people and why. But people come from not only restriction, and a lot of that restriction, what that really is enmeshment. So this is like our history, and this has even happened in my family, and I don't fault my parents for being in a situation that they couldn't control either. I just happened to be the one that started to realize, like, oh, I was exposed to this. And what enmeshment really is, when it comes to talking about boundaries are tricky, which is why you won't see that many recordings about what boundaries are, because that is where I can do my best to explain boundaries to you, but boundaries have to be an evolving practice. Not only before you get to a practice, you have to understand generally a healthy view of what they are. People will claim that they have boundaries, and they will be restricting themselves and other people from being able to have access to them. That's not a boundary. It's a rigid boundary, but it's not a healthy boundary. Enmesh boundaries are the lack thereof. You see this a lot in. I grew up in enmesh boundaries where we're cohesive units, where we don't have any like trained or conditioned limits to our thought process, to our emotions, to how much information we share with people. And that is, so when you come from an older like generation family system, a lot of the times those systems, even a rigid boundary is an enmeshment in some regard, because it's usually a rigid boundary comes from a lack of intention of setting a healthier, more stable boundary. And so enmeshment really looks like a lack of boundaries or an overabundance of rigid boundaries, because then it's just, you have a wall. You have those people who don't necessarily know how to come out of their own minds and be able to have a conversation with you about conflict resolution or something like that, right? So my clients who's coming to therapy are these people who are in a very restrictive environment, in an enmeshed environment where you have little to no structure. And basically it overall turns into an imbalance, not only from a chemical level. So we all have generally heard depression is a chemical imbalance in the brain, which is truth. But there's also, it's an imbalance in your belief system. It's an imbalance in your ability to trust yourself and learn that concept of self-efficacy, that you can believe that you'll be okay. And so what really is therapy? It's conditioning. It's reconditioning the central nervous system and learning how to self-regulate. It's learning how to discern. So we have our emotional mind, we have our rational mind, and to be able to form a wise mind of discernment, of being able to, recognize like, okay, if my mother said that I was pathetic, and They'd be like, you know what? I can respect that that's your viewpoint, but it's also very pathetic that you call me pathetic as a person that you produced in this world. That I don't have to send the patheticism, whatever that fancy word would be. I don't have to send that right back to her and match her energy, because that is how I have had to recondition my brain as well as my body to be more in my control, versus being like, you know what? No, you're pathetic. Yo, mama. And then, you get yourself into this weird situation where you're insulting your mother, who would ultimately be the reason that you exist, right? So what is really who comes to therapy? It's the people who have just honestly had enough. And it doesn't mean that anything outside of themselves, outside of the room and the space that I create for them in a session, that nothing's really changed. So what happens in therapy? Well, in time, and that's, everyone works on their own timeline, but if you're going to come into my therapeutic space, I'm going to teach you that you have the dignity and respect that you deserve, regardless of whether or not that you've made a mistake, whether you got angry with me. Is that really therapy is about preparedness to go back out into the world and be able to emulate that space that you can give yourself. Now, that's where it takes a little bit of time, but I've also tried to figure out different ways, because everyone works on a different timeline. But what therapy really is being able to hold space for someone. It's teaching them how to not only, breathe and cope with the things that they can't control. Like, I can't control people saying nasty shit to me. Hopefully we can edit that. I don't care. I cuss. But I can't control what people's perceptions of me are. I can't control people's assumptions that they make about who I am and how I live my life. But I am prepared to not attach myself to that when people voice that to me. Oops, I forgot I gotta check the comments, because sometimes people be leaving messages I need to respond to. So what really therapy is, and that should be across the board of any therapist. I'm gonna get a little bit into the weeds of just explaining how you maybe need to understand the different types of therapists in here. And when I use the word therapist, just a disclaimer, I think you guys all know for my brand, but for anyone new listening to this, there are different therapies, right? Physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, all that. This is about mental health and brain therapy, okay? Behavior therapy. And when we talk about what therapy is, every therapist is a little different. But I think you have to understand, what can you expect if your family member is going into treatment of some kind? You can expect that there is going to be some resistance when they come back out, because the therapist is helping them advocate for themselves. A therapist is helping them organize their thoughts and emotions so that they can communicate more effectively. A therapist is going to help instill that concept of self-efficacy and that belief system that, hey, you are capable. And it's not a matter of sending someone out and being disrespectful to the person that they, received disrespect from, because being called pathetic is extremely disrespectful. And for a parent to justify doing it to a child, no one gets an excuse, but everyone gets grace in my therapy. Because the thing is that no one can do what they don't know. And that's just the reality. When I was a different version of me as a therapist and a professional, and I expected people to be different just like that. And that's why I had to work on myself a little bit more before I stepped back out here into my career, to be able to discern and help people understand the expectations we all have in the moment come from being an emotional being. That we will always, when I walk out the door, if I expect everyone to cater to me and then no one does, I'm automatically going to be disappointed. And there is a natural emotional experience that most people are not prepared for. And that's fine. Like, we have to start somewhere, is that we just start. But when a person comes to therapy, it's about understanding themselves and over time be more prepared about the things they can't control within themselves. You can't control the emotional experience that you have in a situation that you don't know, right? Even in a situation that you prepare for, there's always going to be something that we're unprepared for. But you can also be more prepared for the things that you're unprepared for. Yeah. So some of that comes into just general communication. Some of that comes into Some of the stuff that has happened to me in my life, I was never prepared for, and you really can't fully prepare. So, for example, one I'm open about is losing my father at age 16. No one is ever prepared for that. Even when I had 10 months with him before his quote unquote death day, right? I had generally prepared, but no one can truly prepare for a life after that when you're missing a parent who has clearly been there. No child comes into the world prepared to have an emotionally stifled parent. I was going to choose a different word. I had to be very intentional there. And it's not that parent's fault that they unfortunately didn't get that education from their parents, but it's about preparedness. It's about being able to welcome the world of the things that we cannot control and adjust ourselves accordingly. And so when I get, my clients share with me that their family members call them pathetic for expressing themselves. Y'all, you don't have to have kids to have maternal instinct. I learned that lesson real quick. Sorry, side story here. When I used to nanny, I've been a caregiver, caretaker of some sort for majority of my life. I've been babysitting. Hopefully my brother will find this funny if he ever watches that. But I've been babysitting my older brother for ever since. He's 3 years older than me, but he was neurodivergent from the get-go, and he just demanded more attention. Then I started babysitting. So when I was in my career, I was licensed. I started nannying for these 2 young boys, and that ultimately was what started showing me the parental role that I was like, oh, I do this with like adult versions, but they're, I think they were 9 and 11 at the time. A lot of anxiety, stuff like that. It was tough. But I remember this one time I dropped the kids off at school, and this was like a side hustle because I was getting burnt out with doing extra groups and all that. And I dropped them off at school, and I just happened to stay. I didn't know this at the time. I stuck around and I watched the older boy get approached by a bully on the playground. And when I tell you, I stood back, I was probably about like 100 feet away. I was chilling. I'm not going to cramp his style. He's 11, 12 years old. That's his space, right? But when I saw it escalating and I was just peeping, and then I saw the bully pull his backpack and pull him down on the ground, I blinked. I don't remember point A to point B. And I'm not I have long legs, but I'm not that fast, right? But I was there real quick. And it took all of my might. At some point, my brain came back online, and I had to restrain myself from touching someone else's child. I was about to be and I was like, yo, what's going on here? Right now, I have to be very aware of my own spatial awareness because I'm 6 feet tall. I'm already perceived as a threat and an aggressor, especially towards, a playground bully of the juvenile type. Right. And I also had to take a look at what the child that I was, I had a rapport with and a nanny. I'm there to protect him, but I can't embarrass him in the process of me trying to protect him. Right. And so, but that maternal instinct, so that transfers to my clients as well. It's not that I can stop or restrict that, or I should restrict that. It's that I have to account for it. And some of it I can't control. I had no ability to stop myself from moving over there and intervening. And so that's what I want people to understand. Therapy is about preparing for your own impulses. When we talk about attention deficit disorder and impulse control and, oppositional defiant disorder, those are all intertwined intersections of impulses. And there's nothing wrong with that. We are, as a human being, all have impulses, just the same way I have an impulse to eat when I am overwhelmed, or I have an impulse to work when I'm trying to escape things I can't control, or I have an impulse to go lay on the couch when I'm tired. Impulses are literally what keep your heart beating. Okay, so if we don't account for those in our lifestyle, then that's where the emotional and interpersonal dynamics of unhealthy systems will burn you out. the transformation that you saw and have seen, in my, not only my personal life, but in my work, has come from me examining the dynamics in therapy that I can't control. I just am more prepared for them now. And so for an example of one of those is personalization and projection. I would say, if you're going to adopt something from this particular video as someone who's in therapy, now, this is the type of therapy that I do, and that's why I consider more of myself an educator now and a therapeutic coach, versus like there may be that you need a little bit more, intensive style therapy like EMDRs or DBTs and all that. I'm influenced by all of those because I've taken trainings. I just never went all in on like getting licensed with them. But the type of therapy that I do is more strategy, because I've worked with people who can't escape the reality that drugs and alcohol are going to be on every corner. I've worked with criminal behaviors, that people who get out of prison and they're going to be judged and stereotyped because they have a record, but they want to be productive members of society. Those are the things that what I can't control are people's projections of their own insecurities, or I would just say, go ahead and prepare that most people, and yourself included, will always project your understanding of your reality onto someone else's, right? And so for an example of that is when someone, comes to me and they're like, oh gosh, of course, I'm not going to have a great example right now, but it's more in the sense of like when someone comes to me and they have maybe a shared experience of it. And if I'm not mindful of how I impose my own reality and my own understanding of how I operate onto them, it's going to come off invalidating. So be like, oh yeah, I've been in that situation before, and all you need to do is just da-da-da-da-da, right? That is a form of projection, let alone the form of projection that we know when someone calls, hold on, let me make sure I get this right, because I want to get her words exactly right. When your own family member calls you angry and pathetic, that's projection right there. That makes my skin crawl, because that shows very little accountability and awareness into how you speak to your own child. And that's the hardest part about doing work with interpersonal family systems, and why a lot of people just abandon their own families, because the defeatedness that they're up against. And the words hurt. I can just say like, oh, just get over it. You don't want to form a thick skin to people being mean. You want to be able to know when people are being mean, so you can actually understand how to validate yourself and your own existence, so you don't get stuck in life. Because unfortunately, there are more people who get stuck and present themselves like they're light and love, but when they get stressed and dysregulated, they still can't be kind. Now, I can't completely prove this because I've never been so irate to the point where I've been unkind, but I have been unkind before. And that's partly why I changed. I was like, dude, when I get stressed, I do not want to be that person. And stress meaning when I get hungry, I do not want to be just that unaware of my impact on people, because that impact matters. That's generational trauma coming through words. And if I don't teach my clients how to prepare for that, I'm not doing my job, at least to the standard that I was taught. So the other thing that I would say be prepared for, so other than projection, and everyone is going to be a projector of their own internal state, is personalization. It is, excuse me, it is natural, common human behavior, impulse, right? To personalize information. Now, in trendy media culture, and even with motivational people, and this is why I'm not going to ever call myself a motivational speaker, is because the association of like, just don't take it personally. Even my affirmation cards that I do in session says, just don't take it personally. But the difference, let's see if it's right at the top, because literally right there. Don't take it personally. I'm gonna let you guys hear the difference in the philosophy that as a therapist, I encourage people to be prepared that you're going to take it personally, so you can have control over getting it out. Okay, so these are affirmation cards I use more as homework now, because you can't ever get anyone to do a freaking worksheet these days. I get it. But don't take it personally. If someone starts to speak unkindly to me, I'll remember that they've got something going on that has nothing to do with me. Like maybe they just pooped their pants. Yep, that's probably it. Okay. The reason I love this card is because it doesn't say, oh, the other person is just having a problem and it has nothing to do with you. If you were standing there, the likely, because if you were to say like, oh no, it's nothing, you have no responsibility for the matter, then you're teaching passive accountability, lack of accountability, right? The way that this is phrased, and the reason I don't have as much of a problem with it as being like, oh, don't take it personally. It's not about you. Is that you're present in that situation, and it says, I will remember. It doesn't mean I'll just block it out. I'll remember that they've got something going on that has nothing to do with me. So it is more of a response than just limiting and restricting the reaction. If you are not reacting to people being rude, being upset, being unkind, then you're likely going to not come to therapy because you don't even realize that there's a problem going on for you, that you are apathetic to the things around you, that you're non-responsive, that you're quiet. That to me, and I'm not going to condemn you for that because that's burnout. I've been there. I've had compassion fatigue. I've been burnout in my profession. The problem is that the way in the systems that we think, and not only, and it's reinforced everywhere. I'm not going to break down that systemic thing today because I want to stay on topic, is like, what is therapy actually about? Is that we are taught to be unprepared. And the only thing that taught me how to be prepared was doing some random shit that I was never prepared for, like working in a prison system. Only reason I did that is because I wanted to be a juvenile court counselor and I needed criminal justice experience. I wasn't expecting to go work in a maximum security male prison with people who like have done very atrocious, horrible, immoral things that are still human beings who were in circumstances that they could not control and minimized and restricted and putting this in. Yeah, I couldn't control that. I needed a job in grad school, so I went and I drove buses. I wasn't prepared to drive a 40-foot bus and learn how to parallel park that bus. I just wasn't. But I got better. I practiced. I was able to, train. And it's all trainable. We're all teachable. And science is starting to support that too, versus being stuck in, I'm supposed to be an alcoholic because my family was. No, it's more learned behavior than it is genetics. Harvard is coming out with studies about disproving nature versus nurture. Disproving nature over nurture. Did I say that right? Yeah. Harvard is recognized, like the esteemed institutions that we, our research and facts that we depend on, is that now we're saying, oh yes, epigenetics is possible. You can learn. You can't necessarily fully change your DNA, but you can learn and influence a change to your DNA long term. So if you ever do reproduce someone, you're not inheriting as much chronic inflammatory diseases. And you're not inheriting, well, you will inherit a belief system. Unfortunately, I can't control that, is because we're not ever going to be able to keep up with the demand of imbalance from a person who was incorrectly parented or improperly parented. Let me not say incorrect. Their parents did the best they can. Probably wasn't always a good job, because then they come to, therapy. Or if they don't end up in therapy, they go to an institution where the process and the people, and I'm talking to the providers, not the person who committed the crime. The providers are now responsible to reconditioning the parental role and teaching these people about, these are some of the things that you were supposed to be learning. And you're going to be angry in the process of realizing that you didn't get this. Yes, the system has to change. We need equity in our external systems. But we also have to learn how to be able to control what we can and focus on what we can control versus changing everything outside of us. And that's what therapy does. So unfortunately, because I had this conversation with my own mother, not really extensive because there was some resistance, but she's been to therapy. When, I look back, and I as a child, I wouldn't be able to remember everything. I just only remember my lived experience. But I do know, looking back, she married a man that was really great. My dad was very charismatic, but bless his heart, hindsight, I can see the ADD. I can see it. And I would imagine and I also see my mom's lack of awareness about who she was. She's a very intelligent person and educated and married this person for love and wasn't necessarily taught to what questions to ask. How, when you have a child, you don't know what to expect because people literally change. Parents change with every experience. But I look back and I see that she experienced a lot of loss. She experienced a lot of grief. And I did this as an adult, like, right? I had to stop blaming her and telling her what she was doing wrong. And I had to take a moment to understand, how did she get to understand that this was the only way? How did she went through the loss of her parents. I believe it was like within the same year and a half. And I remember one of the funerals, and I think so I was probably like 3 or 4. She's gonna have to fact check me on that one. Losing your parents while being a single mom, because at that point she had divorced my father, and being a single mom trying to figure out how to keep a household going and co-parent and heal. Then she lost her best friend. I could go on. She went to therapy. She went to be able to get general space from the enmeshment that life can be. The go to work, go pick up the kids, go home, grab dinner, to do enmeshment in action, right? Is that we don't have an accountability. So therapy is also an accountability. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about, well, maybe not, because I'm already at 30 minutes of ranting and I'm getting hot because I put a jacket on because it was cold at one point. But therapy is about accountability for the individual, and that sometimes will come back out of the therapy office and come back to the system that doesn't and didn't have as much accountability. And it can cause conflict, but in a beautiful way, hopefully, because I teach my clients to do it tactfully and take their time with it. And it's not going to be right away. So my coaching program, little plug here, just to give you an idea of, like, I still do some private practice therapy, but I've switched gears to do more education, to do more speaking, and just awareness building. But I have a therapeutic coaching course that is kind of meant to be a supplement, not to the traditional therapy, but it's also to fill the role that I can't fill anymore, which is doing one-to-one therapy at a rate that just completely burnt me out. And also just because I didn't feel like I was honoring truly who I was and who other people need me to be in this world is the hope. Sometimes when I'm so, back to back with sessions and I can't, I have to take my time. Like, I can't put out, social media content, and I'm not going to, like a typical content creator, because my overall goal is to get people connected off of social media a little bit more, because social media is not the full problem, but it does contribute to the overall issue that we're dealing with, which is a lack of connectedness. And before we can get connected with each other, we have to get connected with ourselves. We have to understand where the disconnect is so we can start bridging that gap in our own thinking. So my coaching program, we slowly introduce the same information that I can sit here and teach you today, but I also have mindfulness conditioned in there before, during, and after the session. The breath work is starting to be kind of retrained, because the first thing that the body does when we get scared, we hold our breath. So that's why I stick to the basics, and I see all these different modalities being created, and it confuses people as to, like, oh, well, what type of therapy do I need? Do I need somatic therapy? Do I need EMDR? Do I need DBT? Do I need CBT? I didn't want to create a new modality. I wanted to create a software update to the modalities that people of information, because it's all the same information. EMDR is just teaching you how to regulate with tapping. EFT is teaching you how to regulate your body with tapping. It's also bringing narrative therapy to it, because as you pair EFT to narrative, you're rewiring the brain to think differently. to say a different narrative. So all the different types of modalities that are out there, there are great things about them, but they're still missing a lot. And they're missing the fundamental update of information that we're still not training, which is how you eat and how you nourish yourself and your soul. And then also, too, it's just the slow integration of information. And I think clinicians, this is kind of turning into a little bit of a rant towards not only the parents and the providers, but putting the expectation on the providers is that if you are prioritizing getting more clients in the day because of the urgency of the need for mental health right now, you're contributing to the overall problem of not taking care of yourself, and you're going to burn out. And that's why I'm now the provider for the providers. So if I see a person individually, I'm holding the people who have access to more people and doing training to hold those people, because once you nourish the soil that the seed is planted in, the seed will produce. And providers, the healthcare system, so if you go back and listen to my, I don't want to call them rants because, but my talk last week about moral injury and the health of healthcare is that the providers of our systems are the ones that the responsibility is going to fall on to model what is needed to start changing the system. Okay. So I got one more thing. I just flung that card way too hard. I got one more thing, and this is to help hopefully people who, if you want to go to therapy, you can better understand the different types of therapists, is that, and there is a difference about what to expect. So if you see my credentials here, LCSW stands for Licensed Clinical Social Worker, which means my education background, I have a bachelor's degree in social work, and I did minor in psychology, so I started getting interested in psychology then, right? My master's degree is in community-based social work, but I focused on substance abuse and addictions. But my master's degree is in social work, so they teach you. East Carolina University had a great program that was kind of like clinical community, so you get a little bit of both, but ultimately, yeah, you kind of have to decide. I'm a little greedy. I didn't want to decide, so I do both. I am trained clinically, but I'm now coming back out into the community because that's where social work is about reconstructing and rebalancing systems that were existing and updating them. So when you come, if you see a therapist who's a clinical social worker, an LCSW, then more than likely you're going to get a version of me in some regard, of someone who's passionate about social justice and social change, who values the dignity and worth of a person. All of our social work values, you guys can Google that, social code of ethics and our guiding principles. So that's one thing. If you go to an LMFT, a licensed marriage and family therapist, they have an educational background in a lot of family systems. They actually get different type of training than I even get. They have a little bit more accountability towards couples therapy, towards family therapy, and working with the unit as a whole. Now, my secondary credential, this one, the LCAS, Licensed Clinical Addiction Specialist. So first of all, this is all this alphabet soup here. I'm trying to make sure y'all can see my finger and it keeps disappearing. This alphabet soup is all just my licenses. These are the things that I have to maintain continuing education towards. I have a certain degree that the shared population we adhere to, right? But an LCAS isn't necessarily something I went to school for, but I did minor in it in my master's level, where I started to learn addiction studies. I started doing more, so most of my practicum in school, as well as my clinical experience out, had an infusion with substance use. So, and then this other last credential is just, it means certified clinical supervisor, whereas I am a supervisor for the other therapists coming into not only my profession, but I'm held to a standard of like supervising clinicians who supervise clients, right? And that has been a journey. And honestly, I'm working towards being a better supervisor, which is why I'm coming a little bit more out of the one-to-one role, even as a solo private practice, solopreneur of my practice, because I'm going around to educate clinicians that don't necessarily have the understanding of all these different experiences. Because if you're only singularly licensed, then you're less likely to end up in systems to deal with very resistant personality types. How do you deal with the communication and the interpersonal and resistance that's going to come with someone who is so conditioned to be defensive all the time because they are just so used to being minimized, so used to being restricted, so used to being overlooked? That is a rapport that you have to be prepared for. And some people really know how to mask it, and which is why therapy tends to be unproductive or unsuccessful for some people, right? So I'm going to try to teach clinicians that. But let me finish my other thing. So LMFTs get an education, background, and family, couples counseling, and they can see in, I believe that, yes, everyone, any licensed clinician should have the ability to diagnose. But I really hope these other education backgrounds, they have the accountability to the treatment process. Hold on. My brain is like, I got to get it right. I keep this tab open. Oh, when did I close it? No. 12 core functions. That's what I was looking for. 12 core functions. What the 12 core functions are is an outline of like treatment from top to bottom of like intake, screening, orientation, treatment planning, diagnoses, case management, consultation, all of the different steps that a clinician has to carry out to help a person get better. Okay. So if you're not getting better, make a consultation, get some perspective with another therapist. So let me go to another frequent, just kind of explaining the difference of what to expect in therapy and how do you choose a therapist that may be more aligned with what are you wanting out of the experience of this type of relationship. So LCMHCs, licensed clinical mental health counselor, formerly used to be LPCs, licensed professional counselors. Their background, I believe, is a lot more counseling education. I don't know the details, and so hopefully my other fellow clinicians can maybe give an insight in the comments of like, what is your background? Because as a social worker, I took a lot of history classes. Most people would be surprised to hear that. I'm not just trained in psychology. I took some abnormal psych classes, and I took neuroscience classes, and I took this was just in my master's program, let alone the trainings that I've done outside in the last 12 years of my career. But counselors get a different educational background than social workers and LMFTs. Then, not to make it any more complicated, right? So it's like, if you have the choice of like, if you go into the produce section and you're like, I need apples. And if you are not prepared to know which apples taste a certain way, then you're going to get a whole, maybe a bag of apples because you're like, oh, I just need apples. And you're not going to understand that, a Gala apple and a Macintosh apple taste very different. And then you're not going to know that Granny Smith apples are really only that good for apple pie because they cook down and they're a little bit more tart. If you make apple pie with a Macintosh apple, then you're going to have really kind of just like, you're going to have to add more sugar because it's just not going to be that sweet because Macintosh apples they're just not designed that way. So I use that metaphor to say, when you go to get a therapist, understand what they're aligned with. And yes, I believe any therapist can get you to a better place, because if anything, all those background credentials, ultimately we all condition accountability for space, a space for you to be yourself, to feel like you can, drop the baggage a little bit more and just be there until you kind of have to pick it back up and go back about your life. And it does take time. But if you're really wanting things to improve in your life, this is going to be biased, like I said, but I'm going to say what I said. Clinical social workers get the job done. At least I do. I'm only going to account for what I do and how I practice. I am not for everyone. But I am going to be that brain trainer. I'm going to be that accountability for you to learn how to use your voice, even if it's cracky, even if you cry while you do it. And I'm only using those examples because that's what happens to me and before I found it. Okay? So that's what therapy actually is. So if someone is calling you immature and, hold on, I'll make sure I get this right. Again, I want to make sure her words were quoted. If someone is telling you that you are angry, pathetic, and immature, let me know. Let me know. Y'all have a great weekend, because this is why I have to go spend best time with my best friend, because dogs take that irritation that I can't control. I'm going to be irritated that my client has to deal with this kind of BS, okay? But I am going to make sure she knows that she doesn't deserve to be treated that way. And then it's going to piss her mom off even more when I back her. And I'm going to go walk with my best friend because I got to decompress. And that's why I do go into the gym. That's why you guys see me lifting weights, is because I can't keep up with the degree of stress of things that I can't control. So I put them into my muscles, and instead of absorbing other people's emotions that I can't, unfortunately, fix. I can't fix that situation, but I'm in the long game, y'all. I have to be able to sustain to win the game. So I hope you guys have a great weekend. I will be back next week with another topic that sends us to your family that doesn't understand what therapy actually is. So maybe they'll be a little bit more prepared for you.